As we go out and do community education, we find that African Americans have the least amount of information about the disease.
Although African Americans are twice as likely to have the disease, they're not diagnosed until toward the end of the disease.
But I think part of the problem is still what happened in the past. And there's that lack of trust. Are they going to use us for guinea pigs? Or they're going to be experimenting with us?
That's the story I tell. If you want to be a part of a study, you want to be a part of any medication that comes out, be a part of the research studies.
I'm in a research study, and when I talk about that during presentations, I think it helps people feel more comfortable and wanting to be involved in research because they see that I'm okay. These kinds of studies and this kind of information is really important, and we can't get that unless people participate in studies.
That's correct, unless they participate in the studies.
Our next panel, Inclusion in Clinical Trials, will explore how, for decades, people from diverse communities have been underrepresented in clinical trials. But that's not to say there hasn't been progress. Our panel of experts will discuss that and how we can ensure greater diversity in Alzheimer's clinical trials. Welcome Stephanie Monroe of Us Against Alzheimer's.
Black African American older adults have the highest prevalence of Alzheimer's and related dementias, followed by Hispanic, Latino older adults. Yet, unfortunately, both are severely underrepresented in Alzheimer's disease and related dementia clinical trials research. 39% of Americans are from racial and ethnic minorities. So why are close to 85% of those in clinical trials virtually all white? We know the barriers. We know about cost and language and distance, trust, lack of effective community engagement, using methods, messengers, and messages that resonate. And we've been trying to address that through programs and strategies, some more effective than others. However, not until recently have we come to understand just how important it is that we do the simplest of things like actually ask high burden populations to participate. 80% of these populations report never being asked. So clearly, this is less about their willingness and more about our determination to implement this as a priority from the get-go. A recent analysis by the National Institute on Aging reported that 74% of NIA-funded ADRD clinical trials have at least one exclusion criteria that could disproportionately affect Black and Hispanic participants compared to non-Hispanic white participants. That is significant. Research must include everyone for us to know with reasonable certainty that biomarkers, medications, and interventions are effective and work well for everyone. We are spending $3.5 million a year to find better treatments and hopefully a cure for a disease that, according to the Administration for Community Living, cost the United States $277 billion annually. The need is now. So we know the facts. We've studied and studied this. The question is, what are we going to do? With an American population that is growing and aging and browning, the time is now. The time for being satisfied to simply study, write about, and admire this problem with no accountability has to come to an end. So today we're going to hear from experts who are identifying the barriers, including unintentional barriers that need to be understood and identified so that they can be a driver for change. We're going to learn about strategies that have been well identified to be effective in minority recruitment that are now being applied on the ground with very positive results that should be scaled. And we will hear about the impact of a failure is not an option mentality with accountability and how that drives change. So today I'm pleased to introduce our distinguished panel. First, we'll hear from Dr. Holly Massett, PhD and Senior Advisor of Clinical Research, Recruitment, and Engaging at the National Institutes on Aging. Holly is a Senior Advisor on Clinical Research and Recruitment at NIA and oversees the implementation of NIA's National Strategy for Recruitment and Participation in Alzheimer's and related dementias clinical research. Dr. Massett also developed and oversees the Clinical Research Operations and Management System, which is NIA's new informatics system to track and manage its clinical trial portfolio performance in real time. Quita Beeler Highsmith is Vice President and Chief Diversity Officer at Genentech. Quita was selected as the first Chief Diversity Officer in the 46-year history of Genentech. She's responsible for enterprise-wide strategic initiatives that drive business impact by investing in commercial efforts, stakeholder engagement, research innovation, and community relations. Because she recognized the need to diversify clinical research, Ms. Highsmith co-founded Advancing Inclusive Research, a highly regarded initiative to embrace equitable access. Ms. Highsmith received both a Master's of Business Administration degree and an Advanced Diversity and Inclusion certificate from Cornell University and her undergraduate degree from the University of Kentucky. And last but certainly not least, we'll turn to John Dwyer, who is president of the Global Alzheimer's Platform Foundation and a founding board member of Us Against Alzheimer's. The GAP Foundation is dedicated to making the clinical trial process for Alzheimer's therapies substantially more efficient, thereby speeding cures to treatment to patients afflicted by this insidious disease. Mr. Dwyer is a serial healthcare entrepreneur who most recently participated in the acquisition of BU Health, upon whose board he now serves. Prior to GAP, he served as the co-founder and chairman of Telcare Incorporated, a high technology manufacturer of the first wirelessly enabled blood glucose meter designed to empower patients with diabetes and to manage this disease. So let's go ahead and get this started. So Holly, we thank you so much for joining us today. We were all so thrilled with the NIA meeting in which you revealed findings of the inclusion and exclusion report issued by NIA. What was the impetus for this report, and can you briefly describe for us the findings?
Sure. What we found, the impetus was that we did not have a good understanding of what inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria were provided within our clinical trials that we were funding. I had spent 15 years at the National Cancer Institute, and one of the activities they did there was to look at the exclusion criteria and to look at it with respect to the ASCO, which is one of their advocacy groups, with the Friends of Cancer Research, and with the FDA. And they did an analysis of the exclusion criteria. And from this analysis, what they were able to show was that they could come up with some standardized criteria for exclusion that they did. What they then were able to do was NCI adopted these, and then recent researches that followed up on this found that trials that followed the new eligibility criteria guidelines improved accrual and increased representation of underserved populations. So our goal was really to find out what was happening with ADRD clinical trials. And so we have this out for review. We presented this at ASCO. I'm in my other world there. We presented it at AAIC last year. And the criteria were overall showing that when we organized it, that the top five categories that were included for inclusion, 3 of them were rather nebulously defined, and so they were allowed for so much room for interpretation that is a great risk with respect to including, with who they include within trials. So the other thing was that, as you noted, the data that a high percent of the trials disproportionately had the potential to exclude African Americans and Latinos. So with that effort, we are now working at how to pursue an opportunity similar to what oncology did, is to embrace the field and have exclusion criteria kind of revisited, since it's considered one of the top barriers, particularly for enrolling African Americans, Latinos, and other diverse populations. So in a nutshell, that's where the information, the stimulus for the idea was.
So let me put this in context. So the highest prevalence for overburdened populations are Black and Latino. 80% are never asked to participate in research that could potentially find strategies and cures for them. Mm-hmm. NIA is investing $3.5 billion in this, yet we still see great underrepresentation, 85% being white. We can't really generalize to the public with some certainty that these newly defined biomarkers, treatments, strategies will really work the same in all populations. So we need to get those numbers up. We need to increase that 85% to, at least where the population is, which is around 20%, at least that as a starter, and going beyond because of the high burden that they face. We are doing a much better job, and I would say, at funneling people through the pipeline. We're doing a much better job of identifying people. When we ask them, about 80% of the people say, yeah, I want to learn more. I want to participate in research. So we give them the dance card, we give them the invitation, they come to the front door, they open the door, and then a researcher stands there with their hand up like this and says, I'm sorry, you're not qualified. You're not welcome to come through the door. So what you have done, what NIA has done, is identified, man, we're putting too many restrictions on people being able to enter this door, because many of these populations have comorbidities, diabetes, and other things that in real life, these medications are going to go into. But we have established criteria that may unnecessarily include populations. So that really is what we're talking about. We all want to have safe and effective and scientifically valid measures, but there are some measures that, number one, unnecessarily exclude people and aren't really allowing us to see what this will look like in real life. So is that a fair, do you think, way of sort of looking at this issue and why it's so important?
It's absolutely important. I think that the hard part has been that we haven't had a good way to get our arms around the quickly growing portfolio of trials that we have had over the past 5 years or so. So, right now we are currently funding more than 400 active ADRD trials. 200 of these are prevention and treatment, and the rest are with supporting dementia care and caregiving. So we are absolutely committed to ensuring that these findings are relevant to all people, particularly those most impacted by the disease. I go into this because it's a long way of saying we have been putting the systems into place to be able to track that and to be able to really ensure that that this will improve, and this we will be able to, in any moment's notice, be able to understand our portfolio in real time. And so what may have happened, we have put into place those processes to address it. You mentioned when you introduced me, CROMS, which is the Clinical Research Operations and Management System. This is a new, sophisticated new system that we have built in the last 2 years. The first year we spent building it, and the last year we have been having grantees adopt it. And what it does is it's sort of like, I liken it to air traffic controllers, who at any point they know which planes are at the gate, which are taking off, which are landing. They know if the planes are going to arrive on time or not. They know who's on the plane, if the plane's full or empty, and they know how long passengers will be in flight, and if any concerns arise. So what CROMS helps us do at NIA is it gives us the bird's eye view of the portfolio across the institute, and then on a trial by granular level and near real time, because grantees are required to put their enrollment data into CROMS on a monthly basis on a participant level. And so it sounds a little wonky to your answer, but it directly helps inclusion and representation. We now know at NIA the performance of every clinical trial that we have funded in a nimble and responsive manner. And we could not address diversity without this. We know where the trials are open in the US and internationally, if they're on schedule to meet their milestones, which sites are enrolling participants. We know the population description of these enrolled participants, race, ethnicity, gender, SES, and other variables. So we can identify those trials that are not meeting their planned enrollment, particularly with respect to diverse populations, and then we can intervene quickly. So it puts NIA out front to proactively assist our trials to meet their goals and maximize their representation, accountability, and the efficiency of these trials. So it's a long way of getting at your answer, but what happened is there and we have the data for it, but we have this really sophisticated system now that can address it.
So I think that's great. I mean, we are very, as against Alzheimer's, very data driven. And I think having that data is the impetus for change. We've got to know what's going on in order to change it and identify it. So what has been the response to the data that you've collected? Has behavior of NIA in terms of renewing grants where some of the grantees have a record of continuing to not meet targets? Is NIA negotiating what those targets should be to make sure that we're being both realistic and aggressive? Are we, requiring them to sort of negotiate or describe exclusion criteria now that you know which ones will likely lead to inability to meet those goals? So what's sort of happening, and what kind of accountability measures are put in place?
So one thing that happened as a result of some of these analyses that we've done is that we have just finished, we spent several months as a result of this conducting extensive research, internal and external stakeholders, really trying to find out how to strengthen and expand the clinical trial processes within NIA, particularly to increase engagement and participation of the traditionally underrepresented population. So what this research did was it highlighted a key set of areas for growth and opportunities. And we are now in the process of looking at these to launch new initiatives that will specifically address the areas that were identified. So for example, we heard loud and clear that there's a need for more effective recruitment planning guidance and also for resources for ADRD clinical trials to reach underrepresented populations. So out of the gate, we're currently ensuring that inclusive recruitment planning is included in all of our funding opportunity announcements and our notice of awards. And this is really important because this language becomes part of grantees' terms and conditions of their award. We're also working to build off of FDA's 2022 guidance to ensure that we clearly define and provide justification for the planned enrollment. And what CROMS allows us to do is when a trial is activated, in goes the enrollment planning by all of the criteria, inclusion criteria that the NIH lists. And we are able to really track to make sure that they're aiming to meet those. If they're not meeting those, we can intervene early and help adjust with this, which is critical. It's the early intervention into these trials to make sure they're on track and they're meeting their goals. It's also, as I mentioned, making sure that the planning out of the gate is the right numbers for to address and not have underrepresented populations.
One final question before I turn to Quita. Would NIA or does NIA allow NIA-sponsored trials to close when they have not reached their recruitment targets, or to close early? Or would you extend that until such time as those goals were met?
So I highlighted CROMS in my discussion mainly because it speaks directly to being able to quickly assess this. We're not in the market of trying to be punitive to our grantees, though my background at NCI, even at NCI, they rarely close trials. Instead, you work to try to fix the trials, because the reason those trials were funded was because they're based on sound science and they show promise to address ADRD. So we want them to succeed. So by knowing what's going on and to do it in real time, we're able to make sure that we don't delay the trials, we don't increase costs, but we are able through CROMS to be able to look at the performance and really help and change the trajectory. If the trajectory cannot be changed through corrective action plans and other ways, then down the line, I mean, my experience at NCI was they did rarely, but did close a trial, but it was usually an agreement through the investigator, the institute, and the drug company and whatever it was, because it whatever reason the trial wasn't going to make it.
Yeah, I absolutely hear you. People I know were very resistant to being punitive, but I think in this particular context with 6.5 million people, we have to decide who deserves more protection: patients who need the access to the medications, or scientists and experts.
I understand. I have a strong family history of both dementia and Alzheimer's. So I am absolutely believe in the just cause of what we're aiming for here. So I never have moss growing on my back on this one. So we are absolutely working toward making this. It's the reason I say it's not punitive is not because we're not holding people accountable. It's that we want everybody to understand this is for the big game. This isn't a one-on-one, picking on people. It's really trying to get the whole portfolio up and running and doing well.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Holly. We appreciate you in this space in particular. We don't think we could have a better patient advocate, and one who is going to challenge the status quo so that we can make the change that we really need. So Quita, let me turn to you.
Yes.
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
Fantastic. So Quita, I've known you for years. You have challenged so many people, so many companies, that they need to pay attention and implement strategies that actually we know work, instead of admiring the problem. We know that even inside of Genentech, there have been both successes and failures. You've been willing to call it out, which is so important. We know the commitment is there, and your willingness and the company's willingness to challenge the status quo is really evident. So tell us why this is so important to you and Genentech, and what you've learned through implementing and collaborating with trusted and experienced individuals, including patient groups.
First of all, let me just say thanks to the team for inviting me here. I'm happy to participate. And let me just start out by saying there's a lot of fake news when it comes to talking about diversifying clinical studies, right? Myth number one, y'all brought it up. Patients of color don't want to participate. First, we got to stop blaming patients of color and come up with some real solutions, right? And treat people with respect and dignity. And like you said at the beginning, ask the people who actually have the disease if they want to participate in the study. And the majority of the time, they will say yes. Myth number two is that people believe that, if you bring in communities of color and do inclusive research, that it's going to slow down the study. It's going to cost more. But you know what? COVID shined the real bright light on that. And these vaccines came out in record speed. And I was on a panel with Jerome Adams, who was in the administration at the time. And he said that during Operation Warp Speed, they told the companies, you need to step up your representation when they first started looking at the data. And guess what? They did. And so we were able to have in many of these vaccine trial studies, numbers of 35% communities of color, and they got on the market fast. So all these fake news myths that patients of color don't want to participate, that inclusive research slows down timelines, COVID just shut that down. And so we really shouldn't be having those same discussions anymore. And at Genentech, we actually saw it as well. We initiated a COVID study called EMPACTA on COVID-19 pneumonia, and we had record participation. 84% of the study participants came from communities of color,
Man.
right? And why is that? Because we went to where the patients were. We didn't do the drive-by. We went to Jamaica, Queens. We went to Howard, right? We went into the communities that usually we don't go to. And so we had a lot of naive sites to Genentech that we went into. And while it did take us a little bit of extra time with the contracting, because we were doing contracting from scratch, but the reality is once we got that site up and running, they were able to enroll very fast because guess what? They had access to patients. Patients wanted to participate. And I think what you were also saying about the inclusion exclusion criteria, we really looked at body mass index, right? We looked at A1C. And so if you look at making products and doing research in real patients versus these fairy tale patients that don't exist, you can't make a significant difference.
Absolutely. I just so admire the work that Genentech is doing in this space. And as one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the United States and with Roche in the world, it's so important, your voice and your leadership. So we hope you will be successful in conveying that to the other companies, that this is something not just that you have to do, you do have to do it.
Yeah,
and you can do it. So have you had any negative responses from what you're doing?
Let me just be real transparent. So when we did the EMPACTA study and we had 85% of the study participants came from communities of color, I actually had somebody say to me, well, is it going to work as well in white patients? Okay, you have 15% of the study participants white, right? Yeah. You're really asking us that question, right? When it's always the other way around, ain't nobody asked that question. We do one study where the population is 85% communities of color, and we get asked, is it going to work in white patients? Of course, right? So, I do think the reality is that we have to question every aspect of the clinical journey, the inclusion, exclusion criteria, the diseases that are studied, the investigators that get selected, the research sites, where are they at in the community? Because if we don't start asking questions, because the systemic issues are deep and they go across every aspect. And so what I've been proud of at Genentech is I believe real change starts at home. And so we have been asking a lot of questions. And I think for us, we started working on advancing inclusive research in 2017. And I will tell you that when I first started to challenge the organization, people said to me, you don't have no MD, you don't have a PhD. Why are you asking us questions? And I'm like, what I know is that what's coming out of here is not correct. And we have to do a better job. And you know what? I'm still here. And we have a number of studies where we've doubled down, where in multiple sclerosis, we have a study that we looked at specifically Black and Hispanic patients in the study cohort, because, there's, again, a myth. Black patients, Hispanic patients don't get multiple sclerosis. That's a disease of European ancestry. Well, how do we know that? We never studied the people. And so we're really taking a collective look to say, let's start thinking about diseases that we thought might be for one population that probably should include all the populations. And so real change starts at home, and we're thinking about what we need to do better at Genentech.
So are you guys taking that EMPACTA study results and now applying it, that strategy across all your platforms?
One of the things that I'm so happy about, just like a couple of weeks ago, our chief medical officer and our head of our global product strategy just sent out a communication about things that we're going to be doing differently. One of the things that we're going to be doing is we're going to do a dashboard, because the best four-letter word in our industry is data. And be able to have a chance to look at the data in real time. How are we doing? We are saying that we want to have a representative population. And, and we can't look in the past, right? We got to be forward thinking, because we can't change the research that happened yesterday. we got to change the research for tomorrow. And so we're going to be looking specifically at our data and understanding in real time kind of how we're doing. And if we're not doing where we need to be, then we want to be able to pivot. We're also thinking about where we do the research. Last year, we started the Advanced and Inclusive Research Site Alliance, and we started in oncology. And we have 5 sites. We have the University of Alabama in Birmingham. We have City of Hope in LA. We have West Cancer Center in Memphis. And we have Mays Cancer Center in San Antonio, because we got to go to where the people are, where the patients are, where the investigators of color are. And we vetted these sites because, it's also like, well, if you do one of these sites, they can't do all of our research. They don't have the equipment. So the people on our team, we found all the sites that could do phase 1 all the way through late phase, right? So we could take that argument off the table. No, we've got a site for you that can bring in the representative patient population and can do all the complicated research there is, right? And so I think we also are thinking about, how do we hold clinical research organizations, CROs, accountable? How do we better support patients? Because transportation is real. Right? If you got to leave your house and you got to go to a site that's, 45 minutes, an hour, across a bridge, whatever, we have to provide people with transportation. And so we're thinking about what are those strategies that we can embed in the organization and I believe that by embedding these strategies in the organization, not only do we help patients of color, but every patient. It's that curb cut effect, right? We help all the patients. So I'm excited about where our future is headed and how we're thinking more aggressively about what needs to be done.
So Quita, one final question for you. You mentioned representation, which of course I love. And we know that FDA and CMS decided that they needed to challenge Alzheimer's movement, not other people, but our movement, our 6.5 million patients, to be represented. Get stuff funded, right? To have medicines that actually people could afford. What does representation mean to you? And they didn't define it. They didn't give us any inkling on what that was. Does Genentech have a general framework for what you consider representation to be?
What we're looking at is, does the patient population match the epidemiology of the disease, right? Because some diseases, breast cancer, Alzheimer's, some diseases disproportionately impact patients of color. And so we want to be thoughtful about how do we engage. And I think there's some really good work coming into the Alzheimer's space. We certainly have some things that we're fingers crossed, but we know we also, as we get our data, we know that we're going to have to do more, right? To ensure that we have more representation in the research, because the community, the patients, the caregivers, they're going to be asking us, right? Is it going to work in my population? And people want to have the data to show that the efficacy and safety in my community is going to represent me. So there is no company that is doing this perfectly, right? And we are trying to make progress. We're not looking for perfection, but we're looking to make progress.
Okay, well, we're excited about it. Your leadership, and we've been able to work together as a patient advocacy organization with Genentech, which has been great. So we're going to have to take you up on that challenge as a nation.
Keep us honest.
Because by 2030, 40% of people who have Alzheimer's are going to be Black and Latino. 40%. We can't even get 5% in clinical trials right now. So we got a problem. We got a challenge ahead.
And I think we got to be thinking about things too. Like, if we see that in the initial phase 3s, then what are we going to do for the phase 3B, right? Like, so what are we going to specifically do? We're going to put our money where our mouth is, right? And say, okay, if we didn't do a good job here, what's the next step? How are we going to get this answer?
Right, absolutely. So John, never one who is hesitant to take on a challenge. So we've got this 40% challenge that might be looming, but really we know that you have been with GAP really a leader in implementing some of these strategies that we know work. You've been able to get some great results. I want to hear you talk to us about, what you've implemented, what lessons you learned. Again, what are the key takeaways from your experience? And is this an approach that's scalable to other organizations?
Well, first, Stephanie, it's great to be back home with us against Alzheimer's on a panel. And I think most of what needed to be said has already been said. I think that let me begin by just saying, we got to really brace ourselves and just do the work. Just put on an attitude that you can't make excuses anymore. So I think what Stephanie's referred to early on in her remarks is GAP made a decision 18 months ago that we were going to start a biomarker study called BioHermes. And the only reason I'm probably here is because I was the guy that said, in consultation with my leadership team, and I'll tell you, it wasn't a unanimous discussion. We would not close the BioHermes biomarker study till we had at least 20% African Americans or Latinos in the study, period. We burned the boats. Doesn't happen in our business enough. Just said, we don't stop till we get it right. So we're concluding that study this month, which I'm very pleased to say is done. And we're going to be at between 22 and 24%. Wow. So we're already over 20 and we still have 50 people to go. Mm-hmm. And so we're very grateful for that. So what's the learnings from that? First, leadership has to lead and just say, we're not going to take excuses. We're going to find solutions. And we included that when we did that, everything about the way we conducted that study changed. We asked, where do we go? Who do we work with? We analyzed the sites to determine, did they have people that look like the people we wanted to recruit in the site? That's another myth, right? No. I mean, folks don't want to go get asked a lot of personal questions and a big hairy drug jumped in their veins if that's somebody that looks like me talking to them rather than somebody that looks like them talking to them, because it's an issue of trust and association. And we found a network of subnetwork of our network of 14 sites. We recruited 1,000 people in 18 months across 3 different cohorts. So we learned a lot. Now, some of you may know me. I was not entirely GAP itself, along with my partner and friend George Vredenberg at Us Against Alzheimer's. We were not enchanted entirely by everything CMS did when it came to the Aduhelm decision and creating a class CED rather than a 1-by-1 NCD process. We were quite vocal about that. But I want to go on the record here. What the administrator did with respect to standing up and saying, don't come here with drugs that don't look like the people you want to make it available to in the Medicare beneficiaries was a good thing. And it has changed everything. As of December of this year, we only had one study that had given us an absolute mandate with respect to finding a minimum population of underrepresented folks into a given trial. That was our own biomarker study. Today, we have 5. And pharma has drunk the Kool-Aid. They still have a lot of work to do, but they have taken the steps, including our partner, Genentech. And they know that the game changed, that they're being held accountable, and it is not going to be an easy conversation if they come in performing the way they did in the past in the future. And I think that was a great contribution to creating momentum in the private sector for solving this problem. You were going to ask me a follow-up question?
I think I was. I mean, just so I just think it's really important, your BioHermes study, what you did in that. And I think pointing to the idea, we're making progress in being able to better identify people who may go on to develop Alzheimer's disease, which is also crucial.
Absolutely.
For racial participation, because 40% of those people, we say 6.5 million, 40% of Blacks and Latinos are not diagnosed or aren't being told of the diagnosis. So it's a burden that we don't even understand.
So the message, I know we are coming close to our time. So I want to get one clear message across, which we've done with Genentech. We basically emptied out the toolbox and said, we're going to try everything. And we're not afraid of a failure. We're just afraid of not trying. So we did 4 things that are not ubiquitously done in Alzheimer's trials. First of all, we created a push-pull strategy. So since December of this year, my own team was only about, I just did the number again to be sure I was telling the truth. We were 12% non-white European descent in my own company. Today, we're at 35%. And the reason is, if you're going to go into communities and ask them to trust you, you better look and talk like you came from that community, because they do, and understand the issues that are unique to that community so that we can be successful. We have a bunch of young Obamas, kids, many of them are kids straight out of college. Some of them have masters, some of them have PhDs. But the issue was we had to teach them to talk pharma, not teach pharma people to talk Latino or African American. That's the truth. She's smiling, but that's the God's truth. We're teaching them how to speak pharma.
That's interesting.
So that when they go back to the companies, they can tell them the ground truth of what's going on. The other 2 things that were really important, with the help of Genentech, we have our first mobile unit out in the field. It's called Thor, Taking Healthcare on the Road. So the average clinical trial site is being held accountable to 4 to 6 screens of underrepresented population members for the average study. When we take Thor someplace, we're doing 25 to 50 visits in one stop. And so we're averaging 60% underrepresented folks. Interestingly, we go to communities, you'd say, well, those should be, overwhelmingly African-American or Latino. Guess what? Lower socioeconomic groups is what we target. And there's a lot of white folks that from those groups that want to learn about their brain health too. So we're averaging 40% from lower socioeconomic groups who are coming on to Thor and getting a cognitive review. That is great. Because education is also an underrepresented, lower education and the poor are an underrepresented class as well in our trials. We need all of that. Yeah. And the last thing we did, which I think is really important, you probably saw the Today program, is El Faro. We started the first site in the Rio Grande Valley for Alzheimer's or any CNS research. The closest next site is San Antonio, Texas, which is about 400 miles away. And it was a math problem. If you want folks that don't look like me, then go to the community where the only folks you can recruit are African Americans or Mexican Americans in El Faro's case. And if we ever recruit somebody that is not Mexican American in El Faro, we got to do a recount, because there's just nobody of age down there that doesn't look Mexican American and self-proclaim. Yeah. And the last thing, we got to get folks into trials routinely that are Spanish speakers. The NIA.
You got to have trials that can speak Spanish too.
Yeah, but we got to get folks to rate them that speak Spanish, Stephanie. Yeah. And we got to hold ourselves accountable that we don't let ourselves ask people to feel comfortable getting assessed in their non-native tongue. That's a travesty. And I think we're getting there, but it takes work across the board. I'll stop.
Okay, well, everything you said is fantastic. We got to get you more Avengers out in the field. If it's Avenger versus Marvel, I'm not really quite sure, but I think Thor is an Avenger, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so we got one more. We got a question that's coming from the audience. We want to make sure we get to. We've only got 2 minutes left. And I think, Holly, this question is for you, which is, will Chrome's data be made public either during or after trial recruitment completion?
So the Chrome's data is an internal system for managing our trials. Similar to the National Cancer Institute, who is one of the only other 2 institutes that have something similar to Chrome's, ultimately what we will be doing is finding a way to have report out in a public fashion as to the progress of the trials and where they're at. So that's about where we'll be at. We'll be following the oncology model for that. So, but it's mostly to be used internally to manage the portfolio.
Well, I think we would love to see some public access to that important data so that taxpayers can actually help you hold the sites accountable. Last question is, does anyone know what the relative performance in government and industry-sponsored trials, like how well are we doing in government-sponsored trials versus industry-sponsored trials in terms of racial representation?
I'm going to jump in and don't take the industry is outpacing government right now by an order of magnitude. And I have unlimited respect for Holly and everything the NIA is doing, but the amount of the structures within academic sites to get the change we need is just going to be slower. Hiring slower, the community's awareness of those sites is different every community, every town we go to. Industry is going to be way ahead of the government in the short term. Long term, I hope everybody raises all boats.
So I'm hopeful that next year we'll have a panel where we're able to talk about the success of a great collaboration between the government and industry partners. Thank you all for your time and attention. We really appreciate hearing all the wonderful things that you're doing. We really appreciate you challenging us and challenging everyone to reach higher goals and to not take failure as an option. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.